Please be seated. Reverend Cohen and my family of grace, it's nice to be back. One does get tired of laying on a beach all summer long. One does get tired of sunset after sunset. One wants to get back to some kind of normal. And one sometimes may get tired of the grandchildren running and asking Papa to take them everywhere. But one thing I never get tired of is being with the ones I love, and so it's nice to be with you here today on this beautiful summer day. And I do want to extend certainly my sympathies on the passing of Her Majesty, and certainly honor her today in my words and in my prayers and our worship. I'm sure everyone in this congregation today, maybe except the young children, young adults, has had to play the role of executor. When a loved one dies, it's a role that's given to certain people in our families to dispense of our loved ones' properties, monies, to distribute certainly funds to benefactors. It's also an opportunity to pay debts, also to receive monies from those who may have owed those that have passed. And also executors also play a role of paying income tax for deceased loved ones at the time of passing. Executors are very important because they have a role of distributing someone's wealth, of managing someone's wealth. You and I are the executors of God's will. This gospel teaches us that you and I are responsible for managing God's wealth. The gift of our time, the gift of our talent, and the gift of our treasures. So the parable today is a parable very difficult to understand because we can learn a good lesson from a bad example. And what is that? Well, Jesus doesn't commend the dishonest steward for cheating. He doesn't say it's good to be dishonest. But what he does do is he points out to the disciples the shrewdness, the cleverness, the creativity of this manager who was able to look after himself. And so Jesus says to us, you should have the same thought, the same cleverness, the same shrewdness as this dishonest servant. Because we have been given His will, and His will is to build His kingdom. God's will for us is to build His kingdom, His rule of love. The whole Bible could be sewn up in one line. Where there is no love, put love, and there you will find love. St. John of the Cross. Where there is no love, put love, and there you will find love. Our mission is to be managers of His will, managers of our time, managers of His talents, His treasures. Because when you think about it, we own nothing. Everything is on loan. We are entrusted to build God's kingdom and not ours. We can't take anything with us. We don't own the bank accounts. We don't own the homes, the cars, the cottages. We don't own the clothing we wear, the jewelry. It belongs to our Creator God. But we are invited to execute His talent, His time, His life to others. We are invited to be managers of His wealth. When I was a young child, my mother and father had an expression, and maybe you have heard it before, where someone would say to you, keep the faith. Keep the faith. Matter of fact, it would be something they would say when they left your presence. Have a lovely day and keep the faith. The challenge is not to keep the faith. The challenge for us is to spread the faith, to manage the gifts that God has given us, to be the one who gives to God what is God's. And what he's saying today is, you can't buy yourself into the kingdom, but you can use the wealth that I have given you to help others enter the kingdom. Well, how do we manage God's kingdom? What are the things that we're invited to manage? We are managing His words, His ways with our time, our talents, and treasures. We are invited to spend our time, to use our talents and our treasures to reach those who have not heard about His kingdom of love. The pandemic forced us to change. We had no choice. We had to go to technology. We had to go to Zoom and YouTube because we had no other choice. We had to continue to manage His kingdom in different ways. And the pandemic forced us to be creative. It forced us to visit differently, to work differently, to worship differently, and even to talk differently. My friends, you and I are invited in this gospel to be shrewd, to be clever. And some parishes and churches and communities were very clever in bringing the gospel message, in bringing the gospel message of Christ. So what I want to leave with you today is what I think is three things we do sometimes when we mismanage His time, His talents, and His treasure, especially when it comes to evangelization, when it comes to spreading the gospel. And I call it the 3 C's that are missing. If we miss out on this, we miss out on really managing well what belongs to God. 1, if we do not have a Christ-centered church, we have no church at all. Many churches have tried to manage God's gifts of His words and His ways without mentioning Christ. What happens then? Churches become clubhouses. They are no longer lighthouses. They serve just themselves. Churches who are financially very secure look after their own. Our church, to manage His kingdom, to be shrewd and clever, we are always invited to side with the needy. For the ministry of Christ is all about serving the poor in our midst. And not just the physically poor, but those who are emotionally, spiritually, psychologically in need of our time, talents, and treasures. And so let us never forget that Christ must always be at the center of our management. Christ is the one that is teaching us today to be shrewd and clever. To be shrewd and clever. Which leads me to my next point. Not only are we to be Christ-centered, we are to be creative. You'll often hear people say, well, we've never done that before. You've heard that. We can't allow the past to become a residence. It must always be a reference. And so, as I said to you many years ago, or I've said to other churches, we've learned to fish differently. The bumper sticker that says, if you're not fishing, you're not following. We've had to learn to fish differently. We can't fish in the same place we fished before. Any good fisherman tells you that. You can't fish off the same dock. You have to spread yourself around. You have to go where the fish are. You need to go out in the ponds where the people are. And so we as a church, to manage Christ and His Word and His ways, we need to go out beyond the exit doors, beyond the church. We are to go where the people are. We cannot fish off the dock of Grace Anglican Church. If they will not come to us, we will go to them. And so it is important. My mother used to say we are called to be saints of the sidewalk. It's out there we need to manage our time, our talents, our treasure. We are to become the people who are out there ministering by the way we talk, by the way we live. We're called the cafe Christians, the ones in fellowship, in conversation, allow Christ's kingdom to grow by what we say. And not about what we're doing for God, but saying what God is doing for us. Instead of telling about how big our problems are, we are preaching how big our God is. You see, to manage faith is to speak about how God is making a difference in our lives. That's how people come to Christ. My friends, we are invited in this gospel to invest in the kingdom enterprises. We are to tell how His story is making a difference. And finally, if we're not Christ-centered and we're not creative, if we're not looking for new ways, and I couldn't help but think, a friend of mine who's an Episcopalian priest in the United States, he was tired that no one came to his church. So on Ash Wednesday, there were 2 people that came to the morning service, and she had enough. So the next Ash Wednesday, she took her sandwich board down to the train station. Lives in a little town outside of New York City where thousands of people get on, it's like the GO train. She set up her little sandwich board with the words, "Ashes to go." And she stood there, and every person that came on, she gave them the ashes and an invitation to service. She said she had no room in her church the next Sunday. They commended her for her creativity. She went where they were, and she said she must have ashed over 1,000 people that day. We need to go where people are. We need to go where Christ wants us to manage His ways. If they won't come to us, we must go to them. And so, Christ-centered, creative, contemplative. Our church must never forget the power of prayer and the importance of the ministry to pray. When we take prayer out of church, we take the heart out of the body. It is our lifeline. No prayer, there's no air. There's no life. And so we must be a church that always contemplates and prays, that calls upon the Holy Spirit to inspire us to manage the time and treasures of God's kingdom. You know, people say, gee, if I win the lottery, I'd give it all to this and that. Statistics say that most people that win the lottery, they don't give it away. They keep it to themselves because lotteries don't change hearts. God changes hearts. And God changes hearts through prayer. Next week or the week after, we'll hear the story about Lazarus at the gate, and the rich man didn't even notice him. He walked by him every day and didn't even see him. That's what happens when we forget to keep our hearts open to God. We stop seeing those around us. We become blind and deaf. It's the same old, same old. It's the status quo. And so by praying, we not only open our hearts, we open our doors, we open our minds, and we reach out our hands to lift up each other. And we manage God's kingdom with the shrewdness He challenges us today. My brothers and sisters, I encourage you today, like myself, to reflect on how well you use your time, your talents, and treasure to manage God's kingdom here on earth. It's not about just giving your own personal money or wealth. It's about investing your time and your talents in each other. The pandemic forced us to be shrewd. I would say that there are many other viruses that should force us to manage His kingdom and to become good executors of His will. There's a virus I see every day, livable, every day in my court. It's called apathy. I really don't care. I don't care about you. I only care about myself. It's the deadliest virus the earth knows. I don't care about earth. I don't care about you. I just care about me. I don't care about my neighbor. I don't care. It's not my business. The virus of apathy should force us to become COVID people. And COVID people is when compassion overcomes the virus of indifference. Because that's what apathy is. Indifferent. I don't care. I really don't care. My friends, I love that commercial. You're richer than you think. You are, I am, we are richer than we think if we invest in God's kingdom by managing our time and our talents shrewdly, as much as Jesus commends the dishonest steward. Jesus isn't saying, go home and arrange your taxes so you can give more money to the... No, He's not saying that at all. He's not saying be dishonest and steal like Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. No. What He's saying is, you who are rich, you are rich in spirit and love and compassion, you who are rich in God's words and God's way, make a difference. Like those who make a difference in temporal things, make a difference in things that are out of this world. My friends, let us now continue with the Eucharist, asking God to give us the grace, the spirit, the courage to invest in His kingdom, to become good executors of God's will. May Jesus Christ be praised. Amen.